Welcome to the last show and tell of the academic year. We're really excited about this one. This is the first time we're welcoming several of our graduate fellows to present their research. So we fund about 14 or 15 projects a year from the colleges of fine arts, social and behavioral sciences, and humanities. So looking forward to learning what we have to hear about tonight. If you enjoyed tonight's event, I want to invite you to come next Tuesday to our research showcase, where you'll see dozens of projects that we funded, faculty projects, working groups, and more graduate fellows research. So you'll see some of the same projects here tonight represented at the showcase. That's from 2 to 5:30 p.m. on campus in the Student Union South Ballroom. There's going to be a great presentation starting at 2 p.m. There's going to be a reception beginning at 4 p.m. with drinks and refreshments. So that'll continue to 5:30. We would love to see you all there. Thank you so much for supporting the Confluence Center. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. And I want to introduce you to our director, Javier Duran.
Thank you. So it's a busy night here in Tucson. Soccer games, academic conferences down the street. The U of A is very active, and we really thank you for coming to this show and tell this afternoon. And so we're delighted to showcase 3 of our 2014-15 Graduate Fellows for this evening's show and tell. All U of A Ph.D. candidates who are presenting projects created and produced due to Confluencenter funding. And if you want to meet the new fellows, please join us at the showcase next week on Tuesday, April 31st. We have an excellent group of people that will become fellows for next year. Tonight, you're on the intersection of poetry with Eric Magrane, Pancho Villa with Marco Macias, and Edward Polanco's work on creating an app, to preserve and learn an indigenous language. Up first is Eric Magrane's project, Woven Words at the Arizona-Sonora Desert Museum. Eric is a PhD candidate in the School of Geography and Development and is a research assistant with the University of Arizona's Institute of the Environment. Eric's research blends creative practice, environmental studies, and social theory. He's also poet in residence at the Arizona-Sonora Desert Museum. Next is Marco Macias on Francisco Pancho Villa in collective memory and popular culture. Marco is a PhD candidate at the University of Arizona's History Department with a concentration in Latin America and in general in Mexico. Marco's research interests include social memory and culture as people shape their relationships with history. Concluding the evening is Edward Polanco's important work on empowering and revitalizing an indigenous language with technology. Edward has created the Nahuatl Today, Nahuatl Naman App, a new app designed to help us learners use the indigenous Mexican Nahuatl language with memory games, flashcards, and pronunciation. Edward is a PhD candidate in the U of A History Department, specializing in colonial Latin America, and is interested in religion, gender, and medicine. Edward's work examines the transformation of the status of Nahuatl woman, an indigenous group of Mexico, in religious and political roles after the arrival of the Spaniards. And please join me in welcoming Eric, Marco, and Edward. And we'll have a Q&A afterwards, and thank you for being here. Please.
Thank you all, thank you Javier, and thank you Confluence Center. I'm inspired by the work that Confluence Center does, both on campus and in the community, and grateful to Confluence Center. So as Javier said, as well as being a PhD candidate and a student in the School of Geography and Development, I'm also a poet and the poet in residence at the Arizona-Sonora Desert Museum. I'm guessing that many folks here have been to the Desert Museum, this being in Tucson. So as you know, it's a botanical garden, it's a zoo, it's an educational center to learn about the natural history of the Sonoran Desert on the other side of the Tucson Mountains. And what I'm going to be speaking about for the next 9 or 10 minutes are some of the first poetry installations that we have installed at the Desert Museum to think about other ways to interpret the Sonoran Desert and other ways to think about how we interact with each other and with other species. So, to get everyone's attention, I'm going to start by talking about scorpions. Scorpions actually glow under black lights. And one of the things that people love to do at the Desert Museum in the summertime, in the evening when the Desert Museum is open, is bring black lights to shine against the stone walls. I'm just curious, how many folks may have been out to the Desert Museum in the summertime and done that with scorpions? A handful, a few folks, okay, so something you may be able to do this summer when the monsoons come and when the Desert Museum is open at night. It's really fun. So I started to think about what poem might glow under black lights in watching the way that people would interact with the glowing scorpions in the wall. And I contacted Alberto Rios, who's Arizona's poet laureate, and asked him if he had any scorpion poems. He sent me 2 scorpion poems. The first one was, "Scorpions are lobsters sent west by the Witness Protection Program." And the second one he sent is this poem that is on the stone wall right here, which reads, "The scorpion carries on its back the question mark of its existence." So we placed this poem on the stone wall so that it only showed up in black light. And kids and people coming out to the Desert Museum would bring the black light to look for the scorpions and actually find these words showing up on the stone wall and have this interesting encounter with them. There was actually one point I was standing back and watching, and there's actually a scorpion walking through the word, the scorpion. Scorpion sitting in the center of the letter O in the poem. The poem, the one line refers to the shape of the scorpion, right? The scorpion carries the question mark of its existence on its back, the shape they look, but scorpions also carry their young on their backs. So one of the things that we're thinking about in the poems that we install at the Desert Museum are other ways of translating the natural history of the desert. I actually sat back and watched some kids walking and looking at this, saying, "Oh, I get that. It's about how the scorpion has the babies on their backs." So it's another way to think about interpretation. I want to think about poems in the widest sense, okay? As energy transfer, as actually a source of renewable energy, and as really these organisms, these animals that do things themselves. And that's one of the ways I think about the work that we're doing at the Desert Museum. What happens when we think about poems as actors in the world and ways of thinking about different encounters between humans and others. Another example of one of the first poems that we put up at the Desert Museum actually is now in the window of the Cottonwood Cafe at the Desert Museum. And this goes along with a riparian mural that was placed in the Cottonwood Cafe. And the Desert Museum asked me if I had any ideas for poems that might work with this riparian mural, you know, portraying a lush river desert scene. And I don't know why exactly, but I've been reading water policy documents. I was reading the 1922 Colorado River Compact, which is the agreement that basically divided the Colorado River up among 7 western states, and a recent policy document, which is the Minute 319 from 2012. There's actually the policy document that allowed for the pulse flow of the Colorado River, essentially letting water flow all the way from the Colorado River to the Sea of Cortez in the Gulf, kind of re-enchanting the delta. And there's work that was a year ago now, and there's actually a lot of growth that has come out of that. So I actually took those water policy documents and used the first lines of those first lines taken from fragments from the water policy documents to write short poems that go in the window as another way of trying to turn policy into poetry and thinking about interpreting the stories of the Sonoran Desert. So these are those 4 short poems. Tributaries within our thoughts are a river's memory of a bird just a light from a branch on its banks. Present and future meander as riparian dreams. Of new water, the delta sings, pulse flow in the small eddies of our hearts. One of my favorite places at the Desert Museum is the Hummingbird Aviary. And the Hummingbird Aviary, there's a really interesting story where a number of years ago the aviary was renovated, And what happened in that process was the birds were taken out of the aviary, the plants were taken out, and then the renovation within the space happened, and the birds were reintroduced. In that process, the keepers found that once they reintroduced the hummingbirds, the birds' nests weren't holding together, and they weren't able to raise young. And they realized, after looking around for a while, that what had happened is the spiders had been taken out of the aviary, and they had to go throughout the Desert Museum grounds to gather spiders, gather webs, and bring them back into the aviary. And those webs, as illustrated by this photograph by Cedar Scott, are very important with the hummingbird's nest. And that's just a great example of a story that shows the interrelationship between different species and how when you pull one out, it affects the other species there. And it's a really interesting story, thinking about ways of interpreting ecology and relationships there. So over the next couple weeks, this is actually the next installation we're working on. This photo is going up on the outside of the Hummingbird Aviary, and we're going to pair with it one of my favorite poems of all time, which is actually by a Japanese haiku master, Issa. And the poem is, this is a translation of the poem by Robert Haas. The poem is, "Don't worry, spiders, I keep house casually." So that poem kind of refers to this story of the relationship between the hummingbirds and the spiders. And the idea is that can help serve as this intermediary between that story and by the encounters that are happening there, thinking about poetry again in the widest sense. And this is my friend the Otter at the Desert Museum. We've actually been working on a poem with the Otter. I've been working with Shawnee Riplock Peterson, who's the curator of mammalogy and ornithology at the Desert Museum, to actually imagine what it would be like to create a poem that's a collaboration between humans and the otter. So we have this series of blocks. We have a prototype that we tried a couple weeks ago that actually have language on them that the otter, she spins, so it serves as enrichment for her. And there's words on different sides of it, sort of like refrigerator magnet poetry, so when people come by, they see poems that she helped create. I've also been occasionally going on the road lately with Miss Marple, who's a ringtail and Arizona state mammal. We've been joint Ringtail human poetry events. Here we are. We have one coming up at Antigone's in a couple weeks, if anyone wants to see Miss Marple in action. And I'd like to actually finish with a poem that is written from the voice of the deep taproot of a mesquite tree. The mesquite tree has one of the deepest documented roots known. A mesquite root was found over 160 feet below the surface of the soil in southern Arizona. And the interesting thing about that root is that root isn't doing the primary work of the mesquite, but is actually sort of like an insurance policy in case of severe drought. So in this poem, I imagined what that deep taproot might have to say to a room full of humans. So I'm going to finish with a poem written in the voice of a deep taproot from a mesquite tree. And this is one of the poems that, over the next year, as we place more poems within the Desert Museum grounds, this is one of the poems that will be there as well. Mesquite. Down here, the layers of earth are comforting, like blankets. The soil I think of as time. Below the caliche, I sift through sediment from thousands of years. Though the sharp desert light above is another world, its pulse courses through me. When the mastodons and ground sloths roamed, its pulse coursed through me. When the hohokam in the canyon ground my pods in the stone, its pulse coursed through me. When the new gatherers of the desert learn again how to live here, its pulse will course through me. And I say, I will be ready if the drought comes. And I say, go deep into the earth. And I say, go deep into yourself, go deep and be ready. So, thank you.
Next we have Marco Macias. Marco.
Okay, so who in the room has never heard of Pancho Villa? Raise your hand if you've never heard of Pancho Villa. Okay, everybody's heard of Pancho Villa. Okay, awesome. So I do Pancho Villa pop culture. Thank you. My name is Marco. I do Pancho Villa and I do pop culture. So what I do is, I try to answer the question, why do we even know who Pancho Villa is, right? That's the question. And so, thanks to Confluence, I've been able to craft part of a documentary, and that's taking me throughout parts of northern Mexico and southern and the southwest United States. And so here is part of that material. So we have comic books, we have metro stations named after him. We have statues, like the one here in Tucson. It's an awesome statue and it has a great history. If you've never heard it before, I'm more than happy to share it with you. Pancho Villa, even though he attacked Columbus in Mexico in 1916, has a statue here in Tucson. It's in downtown, it's amazing, and anytime I pass through it, I say, ¿Qué onda, general? ¿Cómo estás? This is in Mexico City. This is where it's actually buried. So these are parts of the footage from our documentary. The song we heard at the beginning was his favorite song. It's called Las Tres Pelonas. And so what we have here is a mix of popular culture and also reenactment. So enjoy, I did your reenactment of his assassination. So my trip has taken me throughout northern Mexico, southern United States, through archives, through looking at popular culture. I look at everything that can be produced on Pancho Villa. Some people might hate him, some people might like him. I particularly like him, so that's fine. and you know, if you know who Pancho Villa is, you might just have a family history, especially in the Southwest. You might know somebody that knew, somebody that knew Villa. This is where he was born in the middle of nowhere, Rhode Island. This is an excerpt from a comic book. He was basically a revolutionary, if you didn't know, from the Mexican Revolution, 1910, 1920, more or less. He became famous. He was known for being a bandit revolutionary. He was also a business owner, as this can attest to. This is the statue here in Tucson. So basically what happens is, he was here in Tucson. The hotel where he stayed here in Tucson is still here. It's about 2 blocks away. So in December of 1912, he escapes jail, makes it all the way to the border, and stays here in Tucson. It is from Tucson, it is from here in Tucson that he gets funding to start the revolution in Chihuahua. So it's, for me, Tucson is really important in that sense. He goes from Tucson to Chihuahua, and then he gets funding. He goes all the way down to Mexico City. He is a governor. He basically sits down next to Emiliano Zapata at the presidential chair. And this is the height of his popularity, right? After that, he attacks Columbus, New Mexico, and the U.S. decides to go after him. And so this triggers what's called Punitive Expedition. Here we have cartoons of the era showing him how he's hiding in the mountains and how he's running from Blackjack Pershing. So these are actually from 1960. This is another one that shows the East of Power. We have another one. Blackjack Pershing is tied to a cactus, and he is basically dancing around him, right? After he's assassinated, these are pictures of the assassination. This is where the myth starts to take fruit. In 1960, his head is decapitated. So, as you saw from the clip, there's a part where somebody in El Paso did an artistic rendition of a severed head of Pancho Villa. There's stories behind the severed head of Pancho Villa. You can purchase, if you have $10,000, there's a pawn shop in El Paso that's willing to sell you his treasure figure. So you can get his fingers and the body parts of Villa. You also have assortment of movies, which is, I have a list here, but you can take a look at them. They run from the 30s onward. So in Mexico and the US, you have Pancho Villa movies. This is a 1928 movie poster. You actually have a brilliant actor, a Pancho Villa actor, that a movie theater decided to use as propaganda. So this is another example. More movies. This is a movie poster from the 1960s. More movies. You have comic books. So these are a little bit more of the not family, not for the entire family, even though it says that it's apto para toda la familia. But these are comic books. This is another realm I take a look at in my research. You can see how graphic they are. They're so good. This is just the cover. You can only imagine how they are on the inside. License plates. Facebook. Yes, he is on Facebook. And he posts pretty regularly. I guess being dead has its benefits. He has time to post. I take it. I don't know. iPhone app. I think it's fun. I don't have the iPhone app on me today, but it's really fun. State Park. If you go to Columbus, New Mexico, there's a state park named after him, where every March 9th they actually do a reenactment. So if you have nothing to do on March 9th, you just go there and you have a Pancho Villa imitator crossing the border into Mexico, into the U.S. You have memorabilia. So as I mentioned, this is the silver pen of Pancho Villa. It's located in an archive in El Paso. It's not real, but it's somebody decided to do this as their senior project. You also have Pancho Villa's trigger finger. This is for sale. If you have this money and you want to go buy it, it's in El Paso. I can give you the address. I don't have money. I'm a poor graduate student, so I'm saving up here. You have reenactors, right? We have toys. I collect all these things, so this is part of my passion. We have teachers. We have things on eBay. So we have, a mix of El Chavo del Ocho and Pancho Villa, but we also have whiskey bottles. So somebody decided to put his face on a bottle of tequila and sell it in the 70s. They're really cool. I actually have a collection of these. Restaurants, like, Pancho Villa restaurant. And so this is part of an entire political recuperation. As you can imagine, after he attacked Columbus in 1916, his image was pretty tarnished. It's really throughout the people that remember him and throughout the years that eventually a positive memory of Villa came to be. There are many people here, for example, in Tucson, have a really negative memory of him, but this is what my dissertation takes a look at in the graduate sense. Why has this image of Villa changed over time? If you have any questions, I am here. I'm more than happy to take them. Thank you.
And next we have Polanco.
Hello. So I'm here to talk to you about an application. So I wait for the PowerPoint to pop up. I'll kind of explain how it came about. I started studying Nahuatl, an Indigenous Language of Mexico, about 5 years ago or so. And along that journey, we always saw that we didn't really have a lot of resources to learn this language in terms of Rosetta Stone or something like that. So this application is a way to answer that, but it's also a way to empower the individuals that speak this language natively in their homes. So the application is called Nahuatl Naman, which means Nahuatl Today. The N at the end is not pronounced, and if you download the application, it's free on the Play Store already. I published last week. You'll learn how to pronounce some of these words. But before we get there, and I guess this is kind of a good jump off because we just finished looking at a popular Mexican icon. So I'm going to find some people that know some Mexican Spanish. The first question is chicle. So who can tell me, who out here in the audience, all these beautiful faces, who can tell me what chicle is? Yeah. Chewing gum. Right. So it comes from the Nahuatl word sikli, which is gum, essentially chewing gum, right? So in Spanish, in Iberian Spanish, it's goma de mascar or something like that, right? Pretty different. The next word is mitote. So this is really going to show me who knows the Mexican Spanish around here. Okay, back there, what? Gossip. All right, any other attempts? Rumor, okay. So that's in modern Mexican Spanish, mitote means, yeah, kind of gossiping or making a lot of noise or something like that as well. It comes from mitotli, which is a dance or festival in Nahuatl. So this is what you would call these big festivals called mitotli. And that's where the word comes from. Apapacho. This is another really good one. So let's see, anyone out here knows what it is? No one. Un abracito bien rico, no? Okay. It comes from papachoa. So it's to massage, to press repeatedly, or to pamper. And actually in modern Nahuatl, the Nahuatl that is used today, it means to press on something. So if you lay down on something or something like that, that's what it would mean. But what I'm trying to show you here is that there's a ton of words that come from the Nahuatl language that have really influenced the way that Spanish is spoken in Mexico and other parts of the world, even in Iberia. There's approximately 1.7 million speakers of Nahuatl in Mexico. Here's a little map of the distribution according to the Mexican government. And as you can see, the majority is kind of this center of Mexico, where you have Mexico City and the coast as well. The problem that is occurring now is that a lot of people are leaving these areas. So those really dark green areas, people are leaving. They're coming to the United States of America, they're going to other parts of Mexico, and they're losing the ability to carry on with this language. So that's the second, probably most important facet of this application, is to help these individuals stay in touch with this language as much as possible. So some things that have been done already is the creation of certain things like Plaza Sésamo, which is essentially Sesame Street in Spanish, then they made it into Nahuatl. The problem with this is that oftentimes a lot of the individuals that are shown, or a lot of the activities that are shown, have nothing to do with Nahuatl people or Nahuatl culture, and this makes it a little difficult for individuals that are from this ancestry to really connect to these type of media. So what this application does is to try to really stop that problem. And here's an example of a young boy who moved away from, actually his parents moved away from their hometown, went to Zacatecas, and his name is Jonathan. And here I am Skyping. I was actually Skyping with my tutor who was babysitting him that day. All of a sudden this little boy pops up and we start speaking. I asked him, hey, do you speak Nahuatl? And he said, no, I don't. So I started kind of teaching him how to count, and it was a very surreal experience. You know, myself being someone from the United States, I don't speak Nahuatl as my native language, teaching this boy who his parents are fluent native speakers of Nahuatl. And this application is trying to mitigate this issue, to try to get something to these individuals that can be easily accessible. It's free. It's on Android devices that are pretty much 95% of the market, which is a large amount of the mobile phone market in Mexico. And the team that put it together, including myself, I didn't put myself up there since I'm here in front of you, but a group of individuals that are engineers, and the bottom left corner is the native speaker who was part of this project. So as individuals in the United States and in Mexico, we met every week on Skype, via Dropbox. We shared a bunch of our files, and we started putting this application together. And one of the things that we really had to grapple with was how we dealt with this grand view of the Aztecs, who also spoke Nahuatl, right? In Mexico, they're really revered. And a lot of people in Mexico and in the United States sometimes see them as like, well, the Aztecs were so great, they had these monuments and these pyramids. But now look at the people that are here, the indigenous people that have survived, they're lazy, they don't do anything. So what we tried to do was make the app as contemporary as possible, and to really show the individual that are the individuals that are still living here today and are among us, right? So, for example, the logo is a Tecomate, which is actually where Catalina is from. That's her hometown is called Tecomate, so it's a little bit of a nod to her and her ancestry, but also to try to keep it as modern as possible. And a lot of the other logos we use are also kind of revamped versions of things you would find in codices and stuff like that. We have all kinds of things in there that we weren't able to do everything we wanted to, but we did a lot. We do have flashcards so individuals can learn it, and they're in English and Spanish, so that people in Mexico and in the United States can access this application. And you have Nahuatl as a language that's being taught. So this is, for example, the glossary. You get all 3 languages here. And we have our little friend Jonathan here showing us 80, which is the number 3. The interfaces are in both languages, so you can access this, as I mentioned, in Spanish or in English. And for the future, something that we really want to include in here, and right now you can take a snapshot of that with your phone, and with a QR code reader, it'll take you straight to the application. Downloading, like I said, it's free. Only for Android devices. At the moment it's set out for Apple, but that'll be out soon. But one of the things that we want to include is more individuals that are studying the Nahuatl language in Mexico to provide essays, to provide information. So this application is not only teaching the language, and we already have some elements of that, but it's also teaching culture and history. So that's kind of the interdisciplinary facet of this application, where it's not just teaching you how to say words or things like that, but it's also telling you what if they have any cultural significance, how long people have been speaking the language. There's 30 variants of this language, things like that. So this is the type of information that we're trying to really disseminate through this application. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you.
We want to ask the great presenters to come back up to the front and see if we all have questions for them. See if you have any questions about their research or their projects or how they got interested in what they're doing. Come on up, you guys. Questions, anyone?
Mr. Magrane, how long have you been a poet? How long? My question really relates to the interaction between the geography work you've done and the poetry work you've done, and which feeds into what. Does one catalyze the other, or do they work together? It's really interesting to me, because I don't know too many people that are poets and are doing something that I would call unpoetic.
That's a really good question. I think that I was a poet before I was a geographer. I mean, before I thought of myself as a geographer. I probably, when I'm 15, 20 years, I've probably thought of myself at least somewhat as a poet. As a geographer, it's been the last five years or so. But I go to poetry and I go to geography for a lot of the same reasons, just in terms of thinking about relationship and thinking about space and place. And there are both ways of thinking about how words, how language, how landscapes, how bodies interact with each other. And I find that both with poetry and geography. I kind of do work in creative geography, where trying to blend these sort of projects that actually think about space and think about sites in a different way, and try to go and do something different within the site that builds on poetry, but also builds on geography and geographic thought and natural history to kind of change the site a little bit, hopefully in a way that helps people think about what the context is different.
Anyone else?
I have a question for Marco about this image of Pancho Villa beheaded. And I'm curious about your thoughts about that, given that in the media in the last few years we've heard a lot, we've seen a lot about beheadings in the movies. And I'm wondering your thoughts about Pancho Villa's beheading, who did that, and about the modern.
Really cool question, thank you. So, first of all, Pancho Villa's head is lost. We don't know where it is. It's not with the body, that's for sure. There's a couple of theories. One theory is that the skull is in Skull and Bones in New Haven, Connecticut. That this is the skull they use for the ritual. This is what is a perception that's always been there. The story is in 1926, somebody dug up the body and cut the head off, probably sold it, and then it got lost. The other story is an American investor went to try to buy the head, and then once he had the head in his hand, he tried to negotiate the price. And so the Mexican that cut the head off was like, no, I'm like, I went to cut his head off. He's trying to offer you like less? Like, hell no. So he took the skull with him and buried it in close to where he was killed in Parral. And so the family believes it's in next to a tree somewhere. It's a funny story, funny story. So 10 years ago, somebody went to a Villa family member and said, hey, you know, I think I might be related to you. Do you mind if you run a DNA test to make sure? And the relative was like,
Yes.
yeah. So we run a DNA test, and you know, nothing really happened. A couple of months go by, and then the person goes back. The family member says, you know what? I have to confess to you that we're not related. I really needed to run the DNA test with you because somebody offered me your grandfather's head, and I wanted to see if it was the head. So they ran the DNA test to make sure the head was legit. It was not. And so I look at history and I look at popular culture, so I really don't have a connection to in context of looking at beheadings currently taking, that currently happen. But in terms of popular culture and all the story behind the head of Pancho Villa, this is what I know. Thank you.
Well, first of all, this gentleman would like to know where can he get a license plate with the Pancho Villa deal that you had out there. So let him know, right there. And my question is, I think the only Pancho Villa statue in the United States is right here in Tucson, right? And it was donated by Mexican journalists, and now they're trying to take it down. What are your feelings about that?
I'll buy it and put it in my backyard. So my feeling behind somebody trying to take that lovely statue in downtown is, if somebody's wanting to sell it to me, I'll buy it and put it in my yard. So that's my thought. It's the story behind the statue here in Tucson. It's a really interesting statue. It's a really interesting one. The journalists offered it to the Arizona government, and they said, "Hey, why not?" And then somebody said, "Wait a minute, you just realized what you did, right? You decided to accept a statue of somebody that attacked the U.S." They're like, "Oh, my bad. Let's send it to Tucson." So that's basically what happened. There was a lot of opposition to the statue here in Tucson when it occurred, and basically what they negotiated is. There was a scholar from the UA involved. What ended up happening is they said, okay, you can have your Pancho Villa statue, but I want a Kino statue. And so this is why the Kino statue is in Kino somewhere. It's because of the Kino statue is a result of the Pancho Villa statue being here. Yes. So the license plates, you can get them in two places. In the state of Chihuahua and in the state of Durango. You can also get them through eBay though. You can get them through eBay. I don't have any Pancho Villa plates on me right now. If not, I just give you one, but I have Arizona plates, sorry.
Okay, any other questions? I have one for Edward. What's your favorite word in Nahuatl?
I guess it's more of a sentence, but Nimi Sneki, which means I love you. Yeah. Which is actually what my wife and I put on our rings when we got married inside in grade. So yeah, that's probably my favorite.
Nice. One more from the troublemaker in the back corner.
I know. What do you see some of the applications? Tucson is a real zenith for Chicano studies and ethnic studies. But what do you see some of the applications of that app for students that are learning? There's a lot of kapulis here. There's a lot of activity that is being generated by Aztec culture and language. But what do you see as more of an application for students and those who are interested in developing some of those skills?
Sorry, you have to run that. The beauty about, at least in my opinion, the beauty about this application is that it really can be used for whatever you want it to be used for. You know, it can be used by a single person, a single individual that wants to study Nahuatl, or it can be used by a classroom. And actually, one of the intensive courses I took was at Yale, and Yale's actually going to pick up this application and use it in their classroom. Kind of a pilot run, but depending on how that goes, they're going to fully implement it into their curriculum. And here on campus, we also have, this semester we weren't active because I was out for a bit, but we also have workshops and courses, and we definitely can use those there. And the beauty about this application is that it has audio from the same speaker, so you can be at your house and look at words and click a little speaker button and you can hear exactly how she was saying, which is so valuable because you can actually hear how these words are pronounced by native speakers. And that was one of the barriers that we encountered, and I encountered among other people, is that you learn the word, right, great, you go home, you have notes about it, but then you forget how to pronounce it. And that presents kind of a barrier, especially because some of these words have odd endings and odd pronunciations from a Indo-European perspective, let's say. But yeah, that's essentially, you can apply it to whatever you like. And like I said, the best part is because it's free, essentially anyone that has an Android device has access to it, and they can use it however they wish. So